You in.
Yes! Oh, great and mighty Grand Champion! Is there something you need? Can I carry your weapon? Shine your boots? Back rub, perhaps?
Woo! Yes.
First, Ruda!
New Elder Scrolls trailer.
A few moments later.
Your brother, can you...
I put pants on just for this review and you can't even see my legs. The Elder Scrolls series. From childhood till now, many thousands of hours of mine have been lost to this beautiful fantasy world created by Bethesda Softworks. While I do admit, earlier games like Arena, Redguard, and Daggerfall have yet to be played by myself, Morrowind still stands strong as a nostalgic reminder of my early introduction into the world of computer gaming. Not only that, but it was one of the first games to help introduce me to the beauty that is the modding community. I'm sure many of you can relate to the nostalgia that comes with stepping off the boat in Morrowind's Seyda village for the first time, with the ominous moan of silt striders humming over the ocean in the distance. Others may have had their first fond memories created when escaping from jail with the Emperor in Oblivion, just as the Daedric apocalypse was finding its way to Cyrodiil. And for some, the clouds shattering above Helgen announcing the arrival of Alduin in the province of Skyrim is a memory unlike any other in the Elder Scrolls series. But regardless of where you got your roots, I think some of you may have had a similar reaction to myself upon the announcement of the Elder Scrolls Online. Alright, so perhaps my reaction wasn't that ridiculous, but for the sake of comedy, it is my obligation to exaggerate the truth just a little. But I mean, come on, some of you have to understand where I'm coming from. How do you take an open progressive world, the do-whatever as-whoever attitude, and the immersive aspect of questing while still being engaged in an interesting story, and make an MMO out of it? Well, I'm happy to announce at this point in 2018 that The Elder Scrolls Online has proven to not only be a very fun experience worth checking out, but it's easily climbed its way up the ladder to be one of my most favorite MMO experiences of all time. But the game wasn't always this enjoyable. In fact, much of what I'm going to be talking about in today's review is that of Tamriel Unlimited, the introductory title and first in a long string of updates later on released by ZeniMax Studios for the game that not only helped to breathe new life into the content, but it may have very well saved the game as a whole. But before I get into the review itself, we're going to be covering the history of ESO, ranging from when it was announced to its current state and time as of this review. That way, new players can see what they are getting involved with, and returning players can see what has changed. The Elder Scrolls Online was officially announced on May 3rd, 2012, and was to be developed as the very first project from the newly formed ZeniMax Online Studios. According to an article released by Game Informer the very same day, featuring an interview with game director Matt Fyror, it had been in development for several years prior, with an estimated 7 years total by the time the game was officially released. Beta signups for the game were sent out in small waves between January 21st and February 26th of 2013, allowing some players to get a small taste of what was to come, and giving ZeniMax Online a chance to tweak features while squashing any bugs.
On April 4th, 2014, PC and Mac users finally found themselves unleashed into the open fantasy world that is Tamriel. And on June 9th, 2015, one whole year later, console players soon followed suit, with all expected platforms now supporting servers for the game. Like many MMOs of both then and now, ESO was launched with a monthly subscription fee that had to be paid in order to access the game. At the price of $15 per month, these payment plans came in the form of 30, 90, and 180-day increments, with the larger subscriptions offering a minor discount for the immediate purchase of bulk playtime. Unfortunately for many Elder Scrolls fans, including myself, this was a huge deterrent when deciding whether or not to try the game. Worse still, while PC, Mac, and PlayStation 4 users could play ESO with just a subscription, Xbox One users were told that they would have to pay for Xbox Live and their ESO monthly subscription in order to even access the game. To some, this was just too steep an entry point, especially when you consider that this is not factoring in the price of the game itself, which was originally $60 US.
Go what the f***? God damn it, Zenimax. Give me back my money. We are going to need a bigger wallet.
There was also some controversy over what was called the Imperial Edition at release. At first glance, this seems like a rather harmless, run-of-the-mill collector's edition aimed at the most devoted of Elder Scrolls fans. An art book, physical statue to display, and some in-game vanity goods like a mount and pet. But the problem arises when we arrive at the Imperial Race exclusive. And unfortunately, this is exactly what it sounds like. Somebody over at ZeniMax Online Studios thought it would be a brilliant marketing plan to lock an entire playable race behind a paywall. The Elder Scrolls Online was built and established off already existing lore from the universe that, as any prior Elder Scrolls player would know, has featured the Imperial race as a playable option since the release of Morrowind and its respective sequels. It would have made much more sense to naturally include the well-established Imperial race at launch, and perhaps instead consider adding a new race or two later on that fit both the lore and timeline. To make some light of a negative situation, the ESO community lucked out on the fact that the Imperials are really just a variation of the human race, meaning if it's a human you wish to be, the Nords, Redguards, and Bretons still exist as an alternative option, but really it's the principle of the matter. Can you imagine the opposition that would have resulted within the community if races as unique as Argonians, Khajiits, or Dark Elves had been locked away at launch? Even at the time of writing this review in 2018, the Imperials are still locked behind a paywall, of which can be purchased in-game in the form of DLC. So how exactly was ESO itself received by critics and players when it first came out? Well, from what I can gather, it was one big mixed bag of meh. Scores were coming in as low as 5.8 and as high as 7.8. Nothing too groundbreaking, especially when you consider that just 3 years prior, in 2011, Skyrim was breaking records and pulling in 9s and 10s across the board. But perhaps that was part of the problem. It's easy to imagine that many people who had played Skyrim, an open-world action RPG, had then picked up Elder Scrolls Online, an MMORPG, and expected a one-to-one experience despite it being worked on by an entirely separate studio altogether. But that's not to say ESO is without its faults. Many PC and Mac players reported bugs and glitches at launch. Some said the quests simply did not feel engaging or immersive. Zones were split up into level-based areas, and perhaps one of the biggest offenses, from my viewpoint, players mentioned that they often felt punished for engaging in multiplayer experiences, which to me is entirely unacceptable when you've chosen a genre of game that should cultivate the exact opposite. While ZeniMax would scramble to fix what they could, the game stayed very much the same up until January 21st, 2015, almost 1 year after PC and Mac editions made their debut. Major news was announced to the ESO community regarding a vast string of updates coming to the game. The first to lead the charge was that of Tamriel Unlimited. Not only would this new concept begin to reshape how players took on the varied experiences in ESO during the months and updates to come, but it also introduced possibly one of the smartest marketing strategies ZeniMax could have taken to at the time, that being removal of their $15 a month pay-to-play model. By getting rid of their forced monthly subscription, players could simply now buy a copy of the game, create their account, and hop into the world whenever they pleased. To continue to generate some variety of income, ZeniMax also began to introduce some new premium concepts that they plan to integrate in a variety of updates to come: DLC, expansion packs, also referred to as chapters, and ESO Plus, a monthly subscription service that gave subscribing players extra benefits for being involved, such as immediate access to all premium DLC. As it turned out, DLC and chapters were really much of the same thing, but from my perspective, it seems that DLC is released more frequently and can be purchased within the Crown Store, while the chapters are released seemingly once a year and used as a means to put out some new marketing for the game and thus only come in the form of digital and physical copies upon release. In regards to the game's history, ranging from the introduction of Tamriel Unlimited to our current point in time now, ZeniMax has kept to their word and presented players with a wide range of DLC and content updates that made their debut as follows. Imperial City was released on August 31st, 2015 and featured access to none other than the Imperial City found at the heart of Cyrodiil. It featured a unique PvP/PvE space, hours of story content and side quests, 2 group dungeons, and a new currency known as Telvar Stones. Later that year, on November 2nd, 2015, players found themselves journeying to Hrothgar, homeland of the Orcs, in the all-new Orsinium Story DLC. Players were tasked with helping to quell the ongoing civil dispute between the King of Orsinium and the Orc chiefs living throughout Hrothgar, whom consistently refused to bend the knee with hopes of preserving their ancestral lifestyles. Besides featuring a huge new zone to explore, players had over 20 hours of story content to partake in, new public dungeons, and a unique single-player challenge known as the Maelstrom Arena. With the coming of the new year came new content, and leading off on March 7th, 2016 came the release of the Thieves Guild DLC featuring the new region of Hughes Bane. In it, players could join up with the notorious Thieves Guild and help them face off and retaliate against a mysterious adversary faction known as the Iron Wheel. Additionally, players were given a unique skill line to level up related to the guild, access to daily heists alongside thievery-themed quests, and a challenging new 12-player trial. Players seeking contracts stained with a little more blood had their prayers answered on May 31st, 2016 when the Dark Brotherhood DLC was released. Taking place in the rather shady Gold Coast region, players found themselves welcomed into a unique chapter of the one and only Dark Brotherhood. Besides carrying out daily assassinations and working to please the Night Mother, players will eventually find themselves intertwined in a violent dispute between the Dark Brotherhood and a faction known as the Order of the Hour. To accompany all of these shady activities comes yet another unique skill line related to the faction, featuring the notorious Blade of Woe. On August 1st, 2016, the DLC known as Shadows of the Hist was released, a somewhat smaller DLC in comparison to prior releases. It was specially built and aimed towards players who wanted to find themselves delving into some unique Argonian-themed group dungeons. Unique achievements and equipment existed for the DLC as well, but not too much beyond that. It was around September 6th of 2016 when the Gold Edition of ESO was announced. In summary, it was essentially a copy of the base game, the Imperial City, Orsinium, Thieves Guild, and Dark Brotherhood DLCs, a Palomino horse mount, and 500 crowns worth about $5 to $6 US value to be spent in the in-game premium store. For players who already own the game, a special pack became available for purchase within the premium store that bundled all the DLC together in the same manner as the Gold Edition does. On October 5th, 2016, a massive game-changing update was released to all players known as One Tamriel. In my opinion, it was this update paired with the Tamriel Unlimited update that helped save ESO as a game. The tagline for the update read, "Adventure without limits," and oh how true that was. Players were no longer restricted by level nor faction, and as such could go to any zone they had access to at any time. In summary, the game was essentially rebuilt so that instead of you as a player scaling to reach new parts of the world would instead scale and adjust to you. This opened new doors of opportunity for everyone, and helped give that essence of Elder Scrolls exploration back to the players. Instead of merely feeling like an MMO with an Elder Scrolls skin, it was finally starting to feel like an actual spin-off entry into the series, and we'll talk more about how that scaling system works later on. Other introductions, such as dueling, holiday events, and weapon ultimates, also did a nice job at fleshing out the already existing concepts found throughout the world. On February 6, 2017, the Homestead update was introduced. Much like Skyrim's Hearthfire DLC, Homestead gave players access to player housing. Unlike Hearthfire's predetermined placements, however, Homestead actually allowed for a much deeper variety of customization. For those of you familiar with Fallout 4's settlement creation system, you can now drag, rotate, and drop pieces of furniture wherever you like. Additionally, you can display your pets, mounts, and NPC assistants within your home for both quick access and good viewing. With over 30 plus homes to choose from, and no restriction on how many you can own, your only limits are your creativity and your character's coin stash. As June 6th, 2017 rolled around, so did the release of ZeniMax's first expansion pack, Morrowind. With it came access to the iconic island of Vardenfell 700 years before it was made famous in the third entry of the Elder Scrolls series. The nature-based Warden class was released along with it, allowing players access to a variety of elemental magic and the ability to summon creatures whom could be involved in the fray. New small-scale PvP battlegrounds were also introduced, allowing players to quickly queue up and get themselves involved in a combat situation against other participating combatants. With hours of story content and side quests, as well as beautiful varieties of scenery all over the island, Morrowind was enough to make many nostalgic players smile once again with that essence of the past. On August 14th, 2017, Horns of the Reach was released with themes of Minotaurs, Bloodroot Sacrifice, and a visit to Falkreath Hold. Much like Shadows of the Hist, Horns of the Reach had a heavy focus on the group dungeon aspect of ESO. As such, it is seen by some as a smaller entry in the list of DLC choices. Besides new dungeons, players also found themselves with access to new achievements, boss collectibles, titles, and item sets. With the arrival of October 23, 2017, came the release of the Clockwork City DLC. Featuring a heavy focus on Dwemer lore and architecture, players find themselves within a vessel known as a Celestiadrome. While it is physically contained in said vessel, it is said the Clockwork City, or Sotha Seal, exists outside space and time. As such, when the player first visits, they will notice immediately that there is actually an entire region to explore within the contents of this Celestiadrome. Much of the story that unfolds here will involve the player helping to save the Clockwork City from the oncoming threat of Daedra attacks. Besides access to probably one of the most unique and beautiful zones in Elder Scrolls lore, players can also find themselves taking on new 12-man challenges while collecting new armor sets and other varieties of customization. The last of the DLC to currently have been released is that of Dragon Bones, arriving on the scene February 12th, 2018. In my opinion, this DLC is the result of some players not getting enough Skyrim, and as such, they kept requesting dragons from the devs. But, considering ESO takes place about 900 years before Skyrim and the Return of Dragons, this is definitely the best way they could have handled those requests lore-wise. Players who take on the Dragon Bones DLC will find themselves venturing into the depths of Fang Lair or to the heights of Scalecaller Peak to help put a stop to a necromancer who has devious desires to reanimate the bones of fallen dragons so that they can be unleashed upon Tamriel. Those up to the task will find themselves with access to new achievements, unique item sets, and some exclusive Dragon Priest masks that will hit a solid note of nostalgia for those of you who collected them all in Skyrim. Our final and most recent expansion to cover in today's timeline is that of Somerset, released on May 21st, 2018. Game director Matt Firor has gone on record stating that after him and the ZeniMax team tackled the Morrowind expansion, they wanted to work on something reflecting the opposite spectrum. That meaning, with Morrowind being a familiar and nostalgic place for many, the dev team wanted to now try their hand at a zone lesser covered in Elder Scrolls history. Upon the Queen's decree, the island of Somerset has been opened up to the public, allowing players to explore the region in its respective capital of Alinor. Besides new sights to see, players can find themselves with an opportunity to join the Sigil Order, opening up access to a new skill line, as well as the newfound ability to make gear via jewelry crafting. New world bosses, delves, and public dungeons make an appearance. A new group challenge known as Abyssal Geysers have also become present, and for the most hardened of players, a new 12-person trial referred to as Cloud Rest has become available. It should be mentioned that at the most recent E3 Bethesda showcase, they did announce plans for two upcoming DLC experiences known as Wolf Hunter and Murkmire, expected to be released throughout 2018. Since they are not officially on the market yet as of editing, I won't say much beyond the fact that Wolf Hunter is seemingly a dungeon-oriented DLC expected to allow you to join up with the Silver Dawn, and Murkmire seemed to be described more so as a story DLC, with the opportunity to visit the Argonian region of Blackmarsh.
Alright, you guys, so we're hitting the 20-minute mark in the video at this point. I mean, if you're watching, you very likely already know that, but it goes without saying, I simply was not expecting the history of ESO to be as long as it was. And I mean, I don't know that I'll be including a history in every review from this point on, but with the game as notorious and badly represented as The Elder Scrolls Online, I really wanted to give you guys some sort of visual representation as to where the game began and to where it is now. That said, thank you very much for watching this far. If you guys want to leave me any form of feedback in the form of a like, dislike, or even a comment down below, feel free to do so. It's all very much appreciated, and it helps me out a lot. And without any further ado, let's get on with the review.
So there I was on June 11th hearing news from a friend that the Bethesda 2018 E3 showcase stream was about to begin. Having been a fan of many prior Bethesda titles, naturally I decided to tune in. The night went on with many upcoming releases being mentioned in teas such as Doom Eternal, Starfield, and of course, Fallout 76. But then, it happened. Just as the showcase was reaching its end, Todd Howard smiled once more at the crowd, and the screen lit up with a teaser for The Elder Scrolls 6. It wasn't much, little more than a camera panning over a landscape, but to the many Elder Scrolls fans like myself who were rearing for a new adventure, it was the equivalent of a fat bag of coal being flung onto the fires of the hype train. Knowing I wouldn't be able to play that anytime soon, I started scrolling through the Steam store when I saw it. The Elder Scrolls Online for only $10 and with the Morrowind DLC included. Now at this point, I stopped and thought for a moment. I've heard bad things about the game in the past, but for the price of my average fast food meal, I could instead potentially get hours of entertainment if this turned out to be an exceptional experience. Soon realizing that the monthly subscription I had used to hear about was also no longer required, I bit. So, to give Elder Scrolls fans an idea as to where ESO fits into the timeline, the year is 582 of the Second Era. As such, the events of this game take place before every Elder Scrolls game to date. This gives us a rather interesting perspective at Tamriel before some of the most notorious events in its history that we are more familiar with from prior titles. Upon creating your first character, you will have a choice of 9 races, each of which is part of one of 3 factions. In the past, your faction choice would limit where your character could partake in questing, but thanks to the one Tamriel update mentioned earlier, players can now quest anywhere on any faction. What your choice of alliance will instead dictate nowadays is who you will fight for in PvP related events such as the Cyrodiil Warzone. With that said, your choices are the Daggerfall Covenant, consisting of the Bretons, Redguards, and Orcs, the Ebonheart Pact, made up of the Nords, Dark Elves, and Argonians, and the Aldmeri Dominion, boasting the High Elves, Wood Elves, and Khajiits. Just as with prior entries in the series, your choice of race will also come with some passive racial benefits, such as Argonians swimming faster through water, or Nords displaying a higher resistance to frost. Some players like to strictly match races with the classes or roles in ESO for extra benefits, but the percentages are so minor that I highly implore you play with what makes you feel happy, and not with what makes you feel constrained. The character creation in ESO is really well done, and I'd wager one of the best in the series to date. Not only do you have a vast range of options for each varied race, but the models themselves look really unique and diverse. I can easily tell races like the Wood and High Elves apart from one another at a quick glance, thanks to the tall-framed, yellow-skinned, glowing eyes of the Altmer in contrast to the often short-bodied, narrow-eyed, horned heads of the Bosmere. It's very nice to see such a vast range of customization in a game where you may really want to inject yourself into that character during your experience. As you might expect, the Premium Store also offers further options for players who may be seeking extra hints of personality to splash into their personas. When it comes to classes, players currently have 4 options available, 5 if you own the Morrowind chapter. The Dragon Knight, controlling flames, dragonic power, and earthen abilities. The Templar, bending light and holy energy to both heal and hurt. The Sorcerer, calling forth storms, daedric creatures, and dark magic to do their bidding. And the Nightblade, a stealthy stalker, and assassin of the shadows. Morrowind, as mentioned, introduced the Warden class, which gives you power over the many creatures found throughout Vardenfell, as well as winter and nature-based abilities. While choosing a class will certainly dictate some of the abilities you learn as you progress, you don't have to feel constricted to the limits of your choice simply because you can learn both active and passive moves over time from a variety of sources such as NPC guilds. Additionally, regardless of what class you choose, you can wear any armor and use any weapon, as well as fill the role of any position in a group, assuming you set up your build just right. By this I mean, say for example, we take the Nightblade class. Often compared to that of a stealthy rogue, you're not limited to the DPS role. You can perform both tank and healing abilities so long as you steer your character's build in that direction. In prior Elder Scrolls games, you would usually have the option to eventually choose a star sign to grant your character additional buffs or abilities. ESO is very much the same in that regard, though you will have to do a little searching before you can choose a sign, as the Mundus Stones, as they are called, are scattered all throughout Tamriel. Similar to racial perks, Mundus Stones won't be giving you any exceptionally amazing buffs, but if you pair proper signs with your appropriate build of choice, they can certainly add an extra pinch of power. Just keep in mind, you can only have one active at a time. So your character's done and you're ready to hop into the world. But where in the world that will be is based off of two things: character faction and ownership of expansion packs. If you own Morrowind or Somerset, the game will always start you at one of those respective locations, with Somerset taking priority if you own both. If you have only the base game, however, you will start at a location relative to your character's alliance. Aldemary Dominion players will start off on the tropic island of Canarthy's Roost, just off the coast south of Elsewhere. Daggerfall Covenant members will find their journey starts on the desert island of Stras Mackay, also south of the respective region of Hammerfell. Those holding bonds with the Ebonheart Pact will start their adventure far north, on the snow-covered Bleak Rock Isle, just east of the Skyrim province. Now it's important that I mention, at this point in time, regardless of where your faction starts you can easily warp to any of the starting islands of your choosing. Furthermore, if those regions don't appeal to you, go your own way and quest wherever any horse, boat, or teleport will take you. As mentioned earlier, the One Tamriel update adjusts everything to your level, so get out there and get exploring. When it comes to the actual world of this game, you can't yet visit the entirety of Tamriel, but with what they have to offer, even in just vanilla, you won't likely run out of content anytime soon. I'm not going to go over every zone in the game here. I think you'll have more fun discovering and exploring them for yourselves like I did, but I will give you a glimpse of this nifty map here that covers what the game has to offer at this point in time. And I'm going to share a few of my favorite shots involving some of the well-made environments that I've had the pleasure of exploring. If the musical soundtrack in prior Elder Scrolls games was one of your favorite aspects, you certainly won't be disappointed with what ESO brings to the table. Go ahead and take a listen. One feature that I was pleasantly surprised to see was the inclusion of both first and third person viewpoints. Most Elder Scrolls players are familiar with the first person aspect, while a majority of MMOs tend to favor third person perspectives. In ESO, both are viable ways to play, and I find that sometimes the world is best taken in directly through the eyes of your character, and other times I prefer the third-person view from above. Regardless of which you enjoy, I highly recommend a hybrid use of the two. First person, for example, is a great way to spot and find small pieces of loot or other collectible objects in your immediate environment, while third person can sometimes be more well suited for combat situations where your character is utilizing a lot of AoE abilities. I noticed too that in first person, you'll see small aspects of your character interact with the world more frequently compared to prior games, such as your hand reaching out to open a door, or your perspective shifting upwards when climbing a ladder. Small, but well appreciated details. With all this world to explore though, your legs are bound to get tired, and thankfully there are mounts in this game to help get you up off your feet. At level 10, your character unlocks their first horse, adding it to your collection, and thus making it cross-character. Each unique character you make has their own individual riding skills, which are composed of 3 sections. Speed, making your mount faster; stamina, allowing your mount to take more damage and run for longer periods; and weight, an interesting skill that adds 1 inventory slot to your character, even when dismounted, per point invested. Once every 20 hours, real-world time, you can spend 250 in-game gold to level up 1 point within these 3 categories via any stable master you can find. The most you will see in regards to mounts in vanilla ESO are just variations of horses, but of course you can purchase unique mounts within the Crown Store, or in my case, as I'll describe later, you can sometimes get lucky and accumulate a unique gem currency to exchange for portions of premium content. With a map that spans all across different regions of Tamriel, it quickly becomes apparent that you won't merely be walking or galloping everywhere. This is where way shrines come into play. Way shrines are like special altars that you will find in every region throughout the game. If you light their respective flames simply by approaching them and uncovering their location on the map, you will have now unlocked that way shrine for good on that respective character. By accessing the newly lit flame, you can fast travel to any other shrine in which you have unlocked prior. Sometimes, however, you might be feeling extra lazy and want to just warp from where you are standing. This can be achieved simply by opening the map and choosing an unlocked way shrine to teleport to. However, this comes at a small price of gold that tends to scale with your character. Additionally, teleporting too consistently in too short amount of time will result in the fee rapidly getting bigger per warp. It will gradually fall back to its normal price, though assuming you restrain from fast traveling and just use the way shrines. One extra tip that all players should take advantage of is the free teleportation you can get from friends and guildmates. Simply by right-clicking an associate of either category within the social lists, you will be given the option to teleport to a way shrine nearest them even if you haven't accessed it before. This is a phenomenal little trick for reaching new zones that your companions might be traveling within, and as far as I have seen, it does not cost you anything. If you happen to be in a larger guild, like this 400 plus person one I'm involved with, you will often find plenty of destinations for the choosing. Now obviously ZeniMax wouldn't have given us so many sights to see without something to do while seeing them, and as such there are quests to take on at just about every corner of the accessible world. I don't want to talk too much about the main quest for the sake of spoilers, but I will summarize briefly what exactly is going on in the world. Sometime during the Second Era, the Daedric prince known as Molag Bal used a pawn of his, called Mana Marco, to weaken the bonds between the Plains of Oblivion and Tamriel. Mana Marco did so by tricking the then Emperor into thinking he was using the Amulet of Kings to proclaim himself Dragonborn through a ritual. In reality, the spell performed was instead known as a Soul Burst, resulting in the Emperor's death and the amulet being lost. Your character's place in all of this comes during the year 583 of the Second Era, when you are captured by Mana Marco and have your soul taken. You are then imprisoned in Cold Harbor, the Plain of Oblivion associated with Molag Bal, but soon after manage to make your escape thanks to the help of other present forces. The rest of the main quest involves your character working to reclaim his soul while pushing back the armies of Molag Bal, who you will find littered all throughout Tamriel. Just like my first days of Skyrim, I completely ignored the main quest right out of the gate and instead went and did my own thing for a while until I was feeling up to it. And when I was, I found that the story got progressively more interesting as you made your way through the theatrical chain of events. And if you need any further reason to at least give it a chance, the Prophet, a main character you spend the majority of the story with, is voiced by Michael Gambon, aka Dumbledore from the Harry Potter series.
The first companion, Lyris Titanborn, daughter of giants, was the mightiest warrior in the service of the Emperor.
That also goes without saying, Molag Bal is voiced by Malcolm McDowell, made famous for his performance as Alex in A Clockwork Orange.
The mortal thinks it can defy me. Futile. Soon your world will be in my chains.
Both provide wonderful voice acting that was a pleasure to listen to, even if Molag Bal was angrily snarling in my ear half the time. While we're on the topic of voice acting though, one of the things that really impressed me with this game was the fact that every source of dialogue that you would expect to be voiced is. Journals, notes, and bounty boards will remain as text, but otherwise everyone from quest givers, merchants, and side characters all have a voice. For an Elder Scrolls game, this is expected, but for an MMO, this is far less common.
Sorry, can't help you. Too much paperwork. Go talk to someone else.
There's plenty of fish in the sea. Until you try to catch one.
Should have chopped off that bum's hands instead of throwing him in the cage. Gives us all a bad name.
Luxuries and delicacies from the far-off land of elsewhere. What is your pleasure today?
A home isn't complete until you fill it with a cartload of drivel. Lucky for you, drivel's my specialty.
If you aren't feeling the main quest but still want to keep engaged, there are a wide variety of side quests, dailies, repeatables, delve, public dungeon, and group dungeon quests scattered all throughout the game. It's extremely easy to drop yourself in a foreign zone, pick a direction, and start wandering before you come across quests by the handful.
Whoa there! Watch yourself! Something is terribly wrong in Green Hill.
Just as you'd expect, everyone needs help, and you're the only one who can help them. It's very easy to get overwhelmed, so my best advice to you is to not grab every quest you see, and instead get involved based on the context of each situation. You can only hold 25 quests in your journal at a time, but unless it's a rotating daily or a timed limited event, you can always come back for remaining quests later. If still, however, you are not satisfied and want some more open-world activities to partake in, the Achievement Journal has you covered. This little menu documents all of the accomplishments you have and have not yet earned throughout that particular character's playtime. This can include anything from taking down a dungeon boss to catching all the fish in a particular region, or even just for exploring and discovering the areas of interest in a zone. Most achievements will just grant you points that are an accumulative value of your success. Others, however, grant you rewards ranging from titles, dyes, pets, and costumes. The easiest way to find out if an achievement will grant you an award beyond points is to scroll through the menu till you see the little chest icon below the challenge. As you're making your way through Tamriel, you'll certainly meet a handful of friendly faces. That said, not everyone, or everything for that matter, is going to greet you with a smile. More often than not, it's instead a swift blade or a sharp claw that gives you first contact. And when times such as that find you, and they will, your best method of retaliation is usually combat. When defending yourself in ESO, you will notice that the combat system feels like a hybrid of prior test games, and that of the popular combat bar setup found very often in MMO environments. This means that while your weapon is drawn, you have a light and heavy attacks, along with a block and defensive bash. But even without switching away from said weapons, you can still use the hotkeys to fire off other spells and abilities into the fray. I personally really enjoyed this system, as it allowed me to be a true spell sword in that I could always defend myself with sword and shield, all the while engaging with healing or protection spells for myself and respective party members. I do have to mention though that because the game uses a different engine format compared to games in the main series, there is an unfortunate lack of physics to this world, in the sense that opponents won't ragdoll, and while you can collect objects in the open world, you can't drag them around as physical entities. Though these sort of events cannot occur, I do understand why, considering this game is marketed as an MMO. Games with large populations such as this, that have an exceptional amount of people gathering in large areas and using a variety of particle effects, already do their best to keep up with the many people playing. If a real-time physics engine was introduced, who knows what kinds of mayhem would unleash upon the graphics cards of the fan base that is notorious for hoarding every last little item they come across. Personally, I find that if you can get past the idea of a separate engine being used for the game, then your odds for enjoyment go up significantly. Back on the topic of combat, however, let's talk about your available arsenal. As you're slaying enemies and gathering loot throughout the world, you are going to find a large variety of weapons and armor to equip yourself with. One really welcome feature I found was that everything you personally have picked up in the world regarding gear will automatically be scaled to whatever level you found it at. The gear itself comes in a variety of choices, each with a skill tree to suit your playstyle. Regarding weapons, you have the following trees to choose from: two-handed, one-handed and shield, dual wielding, bow, destruction staves, and restoration staves. Within these categories are also a variety of weapons, such as swords, axes, daggers, and maces, which as far as I can tell are just purely cosmetic in terms of combat, unless you play with a focus on dual wielding. In that case, you can get a passive skill that grants a varying bonus based on your choice of weapon. Sadly, the bows in this game have a limited range, and by that I mean your arrow will vanish mid-flight once it hits its limit. It's still a very valid form of play, but it's somewhat of a rude awakening if you're comfortable with the prior bow and arrow system from the series. In contrast, however, I really do enjoy how destruction staffs work in this game. Coming in a variety of fire, ice, and lightning elements, your staff no longer needs to be charged in order to work, as they instead tap into your mana. Simply tapping your attack button will throw a light spell, while holding the button will instead charge and then throw a heavy spell. Depending on the element you use, the playstyle will certainly feel a little different. One important tip to mention is that, oddly enough, heavy attacks in this game, regardless of whether you are using a staff or melee weapons, will actually recharge their respective energy sources. Normally, you'd expect the opposite, but in this reality, a heavy swing of your weapons hitting your opponent will actually replenish some stamina, while all the same, hurling a heavily charged spell from your staff will help give back some mana. It's an interesting system, and works well in unison with the ability bar, since that too will usually draw from your energy sources. Regarding physical protection, the classic three categories make their return. Light, medium, and heavy armors are each composed of a skill tree mostly catering to passive abilities, though they do each sport one active action as well. Like weapons, you will want to make your armor choices based on whatever caters to your playstyle and combat setup the most. For each level you gain between 1 and 50, you will be granted a single attribute and skill point, each to be spent in their respective menus. Attributes like prior games are composed of health, stamina, and magicka. Naturally, by investing in one or all of the three, you will raise your base reserves for each statistic. So a player intending on being a tank might want more health, while spellcasting DPS in comparison might prefer to invest in magicka. When it comes to skill points, you will immediately have access to 3 skill trees, each based on your choice of class. Which ones you invest in can depend on 2 things: how you want to play, and how the game suggests you play. What I mean by this is that whenever inside your skills menu, you have the option to address the skill advisor on the top left. What this menu does, should you choose to use it, is allow you to pick one of usually 5 categories for your class. These categories will help you by highlighting appropriate abilities to steer your character in the direction that most suits your desired playstyle. So if you are new to the game, I would highly recommend checking it out, at least for your first character or 2. It's a great way to set yourself up as a DPS, tank, or healer, and there's also a nice newcomer option that lets you focus on a hybrid of the 3 to give you a taste of each. That said, if you'd rather do your own thing, the skill trees you discover throughout your journey will actually introduce abilities that you may want to choose over your normal class options. For example, joining the Alliance Wars and leveling up your reputation with them will grant you access to unique abilities exclusive to their faction. How you mix and match the abilities you gain throughout your journey is entirely up to you. Like prior games, you can level up many of your skill trees simply by using the abilities related to each one. Doing so gives you access to more passive and active choices going down that respective tree. Additionally, you also level individual abilities you focus on as well. By doing so, they will not only grow stronger, but you will eventually unlock the option to morph the ability. What this means is that for the cost of another skill point, you can add one of 2 additional effects to the ability. This can really allow for some deeper customization to your build, as you can gain effects such as adding a poison or bleeding wound to opponents, or perhaps you are given the option to take a Magicka ability and instead morph it to consume stamina. To me, this was a really exciting system, as it gave me a reason to try out each ability and level them to their prime in order to see what exactly I could gain additionally. One thing worth noting is that as long as you have the abilities hotkeyed on your ability bar, they are guaranteed to gain experience from a majority of your actions, from attacking opponents to even completing quests. Another thing I should mention quickly is that of the ultimate system. Ultimates were added later on in ESO's life, and they are a cool way to pull off some flashy moves at a unique cost. Though not all skill trees come with an ultimate, many do, and they are worth checking out if you wish to add their respective abilities to your arsenal. They work off their own source of energy that you accumulate as you fight opponents and engage abilities from your varying trees. Some require more power than others, and usually this is determined off how effective they are in combat. Once your character reaches level 15, you will unlock the ability to swap between hotbar 1 and 2. This not only gives you access to 10 ability slots and 2 ultimate slots, but the option to use a second weapon on the varying hotbar as well. Unfortunately, if you want to use the same class of weapon on each hotbar, you will need to equip yourself with duplicates. But from my perspective, it's more fun and more beneficial to branch out between 2 weapons. My Templar, for example, uses a sword and shield while tanking, but I'll switch out to my 2-handed blade when I know it's safe to hammer in some extra damage. Getting used to swapping can really make you a beneficial fighter, to not only yourself, but any groups you choose to play with in the future. Besides just leveling your character, there are a variety of ways you can gain skill points to spend on upgrading your arsenal. These can include completing story quests, succeeding during a public dungeon event, finishing a group dungeon quest, and perhaps the most popular method, by collecting sky shards. Sky shards are found everywhere in Tamriel, even the tutorial islands, and for every 3 you collect, you get a skill point. They are not only a great way to pile on the points rapidly, but a fantastic excuse to explore the game world. They will often be on the surface, but it's not uncommon for them to get lost inside of delves and public dungeons as well, giving you all the more reason to scour the world. Now, let's talk about vampires, werewolves, and their respective skill trees. There are 3 ways I know of that will allow you to become one of these 2 creatures. Choice A is to find the rare werewolf or vampire NPC that will spawn randomly in the wild, of which differ from their normally spawning kin in that their attack or bite will infect you with their disease. Choice B is to be bitten by another player. Once you reach rank 6 in either werewolf or vampire skill trees, you can spend a point on the ability to bite another player once every 7 days. There are special altars throughout Tamriel, one variation for each creature, and it is here that you must be in order to actually bite someone. Choice C allows you to buy either respective bite directly from the cash shop. However, this costs 1,500 crowns, which is equivalent to $15 US. I don't know about you guys, but that's an insane amount of money to charge for something as simple as an on-off switch for a skill tree. I highly advise not supporting such an absurd market option, and instead suggest going for choice B, being bitten by another player. There are many kind players out there in the world of ESO, and if you just ask politely in either a public or guild chat, somebody will do it for free. Occasionally, you will find players who try to charge you gold for their bite, but I again suggest passing on that sort of offer, as I have never had to personally pay for any of the bites I've received. I find it better to just become part of the pay it forward community, and after a player offers you their bite, you too do the same in the future when somebody else is in need. This is not only a good way to make friends, but it helps to foster a positive MMO community. Regardless of the bite you choose, once bitten, you'll be given a quest related to your respective disease that upon completion will finish the process and fully turn you into your respective creature of the night. These quests alone, dealing with Molag Bal if you're a vampire and Hircine if you're a werewolf, are another great reason why the diseases are better acquired in-game. Purchasing them through the Crown Store skips their respective quests and thus has you miss out on some Daedric-themed creature tutorial missions. As a vampire, you take additional fire damage and have slower health regeneration than your human counterparts. Naturally, you can feed on NPCs throughout the world to help keep your bloodlust at a minimum. If you choose not to feed, your vampirism will progress in stages, with 4 being the highest. The higher the stage, the heavier your negative vampire traits will affect you, but at the same time, you also gain stronger vampire abilities as a trade-off. For example, by not feeding and progressing to stage 4 vampirism, my character gains the benefit of the Darkstalker perk. This removes all movement speed penalties while sneaking and allows me to enter stealth 50% faster if it's after dark. The difference is extremely clear, with my character seemingly jogging despite moving in a stealth stance. For the most part, vampirism and its respective abilities seem to be suited for players using magicka, but even as a Templar with a focus on stamina, I have a fond love for that Darkstalker perk. A fair warning though, this disease can take quite a toll on your complexion, especially if you let it progress into the higher stages. This is my Redguard character, and as you can see, he no longer suits the copper brown skin he once had before the sickness. Should you instead feel the call of the wild, becoming a werewolf may suit your fancy. Unlike vampirism, where the symptoms and traits of the disease are always present and active, the powers of lycanthropy are instead locked within an ultimate ability. Naturally, you charge this up throughout conflicts, and when you are ready, you can activate your ultimate button to transform into a vicious warrior of Hircine. As a werewolf, you have a limited amount of time which you can spend in this form. Some of your skills can be grown and adjusted to add more time onto your clock, but your main source of extension will be feeding on the flesh of your fallen enemies. Nearly everything you defeat can be consumed, and it adds roughly 4 additional seconds onto your wolf form. You also get a third combat bar as a werewolf that lets you slot your unique abilities, of which are only accessible in this form. These can include ferocious pain-inducing roars, high-flying leaps, and vicious swipes that will leave your opponents bleeding. One drawback to make note of is that you will take 25% more poison damage while transformed. Personally, I found werewolves to be more fun as an active skill tree, and vampires to be more fun as a passive skill tree. They each have benefits to offer, and it's really up to you whether or not you wish to embrace either of their powers within your own arsenal. And should you ever take on either curse and wish to reverse the damage, for a small fee, a Priest of Arche can get you back into proper condition. So we've covered the majority of our active combat options, but we also have some trade skills to work on if you're looking to craft your own items. The equipment skills are blacksmithing, allowing you to turn raw metals into heavy armor and weapons, clothing, allowing the ability to weave light and medium armors from plant material as well as animal hide, and woodworking, the use of collected timber for the creation of staves, bows, and shields. Besides using these different crafting stations to create their respective equipment items, they can be used to refine raw materials, deconstruct armor and weapons, upgrade and improve your gear, research traits on an item at the cost of its deconstruction, and even create furniture pieces that can be placed in your home. Another thing I liked about the equipment trade skills are the style materials. If you're a fan of the many clashing cultures found within the Elder Scrolls universe, you can probably appreciate that every piece of gear you have is now labeled after the style it is based on. That means that an iron helmet made in the orc style looks like this, but if you craft an iron helmet in the style of a Khajiit, you instead would get this. Style materials apply to nearly every craftable piece of equipment in ESO, and they are not limited to just races. You can often find styles based off factions you've encountered on your journeys, and sometimes even claim the fashion of your fallen enemies. To actually learn each respective piece of equipment, you'll need to find what is called a style motif. They can be found all over Tamriel as drops from mobs, bosses, and daily quests. If you ever find yourself with some duplicates, they can often be great ways to make some quick cash on the trade market. Some items you find can be broken down and researched in exchange for learning a trait that you can apply to future created gear. If you are a player who plans on really getting into the trade skills, certainly start researching items ASAP, because the more traits you learn on a specific object, the longer it will take to research the next item you submit. But let's not forget about our consumable category of trade skills. Within this tier of abilities, you will find alchemy, the classic combination of foreign regions to make potions and poisons. Enchanting, a new take on the skill that allows you to combine 3 runestones to create glyphs that can enhance armor and weapons. And provisioning, also known as cooking, this skill allows you to create food and drink items that can provide you and your allies with useful buffs and effects. Each of these stations also has access to unique furniture crafting options, usually related to their respective function. Eventually, you can take on crafting dailies, and should you max the skill out and have exceptional knowledge in the trade, your character has a chance of getting a rare Master Writ drop from their daily rewards. Should they complete these often difficult orders, they will be rewarded with writ vouchers that can be exchanged for some valuable and sought-after furniture pieces, like personal crafting stations for your home. As you'd expect though, all of these trade skills require materials, and it's often going to be left up to you to get them. If you've got some extra coin to spend, you can certainly find players to sell them to, but if it's money you want to make, you're better off scouring for minerals, wood, herbs, ruins, and the many other varieties of collectibles found throughout the world on your own. But to some, that may beg the question, how does looting work in a multiplayer game like this? When it comes to crafting materials and treasure chests found in the public open world, only one player can loot it before it disappears. However, when it comes to boss and monster kills, general loot in the world, and things like crates and barrels, the things you find are instanced to each player. This means that you don't have to worry about going to steal from the market, only to find another player has already picked the armor and weapon stocks clean. This also means that unlike most MMO experiences, when players in a group kill a boss or monster, they each get their own loot and drops, as opposed to rolling over a singular item. Regarding bag space, instead of being based on weight or stamina, it is instead just a 1 slot per item system. Though this does take away some of the fun of inventory management found in prior games, it is undeniably better suited for the MMO environment. You start with 60 slots and can accumulate more by visiting the bag upgrade vendor, as well as through raising carrying capacity under the riding skill. When your bag is not enough, you can also turn to a local bank found in the majority of settlements to hold onto your goods. Bank storage is cross-region, so if you've stored things in one bank, you've stored it with them all. Bank space is also shared across characters, meaning that you can trade things like equipment, money, and consumables to a different tune. Much like bag space, you can pay a gold fee to upgrade the size of your storage across all banks respectively. Another great tip for players is that any items and crafting materials stored in the bank can automatically be accessed from any of the crafting benches you use in the game, meaning that you don't have to lug around materials with you just to successfully create a potion or pint of mead. Naturally though, the loot to furnish your lavish lifestyle doesn't simply appear in your bag. You're gonna have to go out and collect it. You can certainly gather a small haul from quests alone, but if you really want your inventory brimming with valuables, your best bet is to take on one of the many points of interest found throughout each region. Delves are among those choices, and they can be found in nearly every zone in the game. Usually marked by a torch on the map, a delve involves your character entering a specific area that can be described as a mini dungeon for you to complete. Some take place in caves, others in grottos, and even others in the occasional building. But no matter the setting, there are usually always 2 to 3 things to be expected of a delve: a boss, a sky shard, and occasionally a quest. Be it a man or beast, every delve contains a head boss who needs to be eliminated in order to receive completion for the visit. You'll also want to keep your eyes open because there's always a collectible sky shard laying around somewhere in each dungeon. Sometimes on the way in, or even out, you'll come across a quest related to the area. If you don't grab every task you come across in Tamriel, I highly suggest acquiring at the very least the delve quests, as they are often naturally completed during your visit anyways. Public dungeons also exist in the majority of regions throughout the game. Compared to a delve, which can easily take 5 to 10 minutes to complete, a dungeon will generally take you 30 to 40 minutes in comparison. While they can be soloed, it's clear that these public dungeons were intended for group play, so don't be surprised if you find yourself being overwhelmed by one of the many bosses or large groups of enemies. Like delves, public dungeons tend to feature a quest or two, and what I personally like about these quests is they always tend to give you a memento upon completion, of which we'll talk about later. Normally, a singular sky shard will also be hiding somewhere in the dungeon, so keep yourself wary if you want to find them all. Lastly, every public dungeon has an optional group challenge your party can take on, usually a boss with minions, and they are worth defeating due to the fact that you not only get loot, but a guaranteed skill point. If sticking to the surface world is more up your alley though, there are certainly some loot-yielding activities to engage in. The two most notable are world bosses and dark anchors. Each region throughout Tamriel will usually host a variety of bosses with different themes and locations that can be attacked by anyone at any time. Some of the higher end players can take them on solo, but for the most efficiency I suggest a group of 3 or 4 people. Dark anchors, as mentioned, are also an option for you and your party. To give a brief background, these are essentially a link between the Terran reality connecting Oblivion and Tamriel. Found at set locations all over the map, players will usually find cultists performing a ritual here before the anchor itself roars down from the sky. You and your party will be tasked with not only defeating waves of Daedric beasts and cultists, but you'll have to close 4 magical pylons that charge with the spirits of fallen enemies. If you're successful, a final Daedric boss will rain down from the sky, and upon defeat, you will be rewarded with a nice chunk of experience, drops from the enemies, and a Daedric chest that dishes out loot to each respective player involved. If you've played any MMOs in the past 10 years, you're probably already familiar with the idea of a queue, where willing players sign up to take on some form of event together. Thankfully, ESO has one themselves, and it's a fantastic way to get involved in group dungeons. Group dungeons vary from public dungeons in that it is a unique instance only accessible by your group. Furthermore, any treasure chests or material loot you find in group dungeons is unique to each individual player, unlike in the public world. Exploring these types of instances with your group is one of the best ways to level your character, as for every random dungeon you queue for, you are given a chunk of bonus EXP upon completion. You'll also find that these zones tend to foster some variety of story event to go through. It's very wise to take on the dungeon quest usually found near or at the entrance. Doing so not only rewards you with EXP and a piece of gear, but you'll get to follow interesting story events and even be given a skill point to spend upon first time completion. With all this talk of group play, you might find yourself out and about in Tamriel with hopes of joining a community. If that's the case, a guild is your best bet. In ESO, guild life is very flexible. If you join a guild with one character, all of your characters become members. Another nice feature is that you're not limited to a single guild, and instead can be in up to 5 at once per account. This opens so many doors of opportunity depending on what sort of community you're hoping to get engaged with. Some categories of guilds can include PvP, PvE, trade, crafting, casual, and roleplay themes. While most of these are self-explanatory, I do want to touch on trade and crafting guilds briefly. Trade guilds exist in ESO as an alternative to a fixed auction house. What this means is that instead of having one market where players buy and sell, there are instead a vast variety of them flourishing among the many trade guilds. To sell within a trade guild's market, you must be a member, but to purchase, you simply have to approach a respective guild's merchant. Merchants are located all over Tamriel, in major cities to minor settlements, and are usually fought over once a week in a bidding war. Whatever guild wins gains access to their newfound merchant, and it is there they can buy and sell till the following week's bidding war begins again. At first, I was a little resistant to this idea. It felt like I was being forced to be social in order to gain extra income. But in reality, there are so many trade guilds out there that would be happy to have yet another active seller on their roster that you'll be welcomed pretty easily with open arms. Additionally, having multiple economies instead of one strict auction house makes it so that no one player can corner the market and skyrocket prices. Crafting guilds are also worth mentioning to the players who find themselves infatuated with all things trade skills. As you level and progress through each of your individual trade skills, it's not uncommon that you will find yourself with an abundance of one material, but a lack of another. Crafting guilds are a great solution to this problem, as within them you can very often find active players who will trade, sell, or exchange materials with you. If you have plans to become one of Tamriel's finest craftsmen, this is absolutely the type of guild I would suggest to you. Some of you might be wondering though, what about the classic NPC guilds? Well, thankfully, the majority of them are still present, even in this era. Players who own just the base game will have access to the Fighters Guild, the Mages Guild, and the Undaunted faction. They each come with a reputation to build, a skill tree to offer, and a variety of unique tasks correlating to their cultures. The Fighters Guild, for example, will often have you slaying unholy beasts and creatures throughout Tamriel, such as Daedra or Vampire. The Undaunted instead have a heavier focus on feats of strength, such as slaying bosses or completing seemingly difficult quests. As always, the Mages Guild has a strong passion for intellect, lore, and history, meaning that you'll actually be rewarded in this game for reading particular books you find throughout the world. Lore books that are of interest to the mages are stashed all over the world, and they are usually signified by a light purple glow on them. Reading them will add their lore to your journal, and if you happen to complete a set within a region, you will be rewarded with a physical collection to display within your home. Like games prior, you can join all of these factions at once, and level your reputation with each at your own comfortable pace. For those of you seeking maximum benefits, definitely scout out and join up with these groups early on. The passive and active abilities you get access to are worth it alone, such as Intimidation from the Fighters Guild or Persuasion from the Mages Guild. Now, on your journey through the world, you are bound to run across treasure maps from enemies and looting, as well as survey maps from completing daily crafting quests. These are a small feature, but worth mentioning thanks to the rewards they reap. Using the name of the region and clues included with the map, you can track down either a special chest of treasure exclusive to your character, or in the case of survey maps, a unique source of materials that will grant you a significant sum of additional loot when harvested. Treasure hunting is probably one of my favorite tasks to complete at the end of a long night because it's not too demanding in regards to attention span, but in contrast, it can still be quite rewarding to you and your character. It's not unlikely that your fresh haul is composed of some long-forgotten stolen merchandise, but what if you feel the call of the coin yourself? Well, thankfully, that's where the legerdemain skill comes into play. The word legerdemain is often used to describe the skillful use of one's hands through magic or deceit. Essentially, this skill is a combination of the sneak, pickpocketing, and lockpicking skills found in prior test games. Instead of working on each one individually, they all contribute to the same skill tree. When you are ready to begin your life of crime, you have a variety of options to get started with. You can approach NPCs while sneaking for an attempt to pickpocket them, with your chance of success being shown on screen. If you are extra patient and wait for the right moment, your percentage will flash green and show a higher bonus ratio. You can't quite rob your target down to their skivvies like in past games, and instead your character just grabs the first object they touch, which usually will yield a stolen good strictly intended as merchant trash, but occasionally you'll find yourself the rare recipe or two. The higher your legerdemain skill gets, the higher quality loot you'll find off your victims. So instead of picking the usual green worth 100 gold, you might start finding more blues worth 250 gold. Another option you have is to hit up the local market and its bustling stalls. Whenever the merchant's back is turned, you can sneak up and swipe gear and other wares off the table. You won't always know what the value of the gear is until you pick it up. Oftentimes, they will be plain old white tier objects, but it's not too uncommon for you to pick yourself a green or blue tier item up either. Sometimes you will also spot a merchant's lockbox left unattended briefly, and if you are feeling bold, you can attempt to break in and make off with the goods. Lockpicking in this game goes back to the glory days of Oblivion, where you work with the pick and tumbler system. For those of you not familiar with this style of gameplay, essentially you are tasked with using your lockpick to push down a set of tumblers that will jiggle and resist when they are hitting the sweet spot and snap back up if you go beyond. Fumble too much and you may break a pick. Unlike Oblivion, if you mess up one pin, it will not reset the rest. However, the trade-off is that you have a time limit on every chest you try to break into, and failing to open it in time will reset the lock. How much time you have exactly depends on the difficulty of the chest. Beginner variations will give you nearly an entire minute to get through the security mechanism, but a master chest, on the other hand, will barely give you 15 seconds, meaning you have little room for error. Lockpicking is not only effective on merchant chests, but doors as well if you're hoping to rob a residence. Inside, if you are wary of the homeowners, you can not only pick their pockets, but open their drawers, cabinets, and storages to rob to your heart's galore. Sometimes they will even host a lockbox in the home to give you an extra boost in loot. But things won't always go to plan. Occasionally you are bound to be caught in the act, whether it be a poorly handled pickpocket attempt, an eyewitness to your stall heists, or even an onlooker to your next murder of an innocent civilian. Regardless of the crime in which you are accused, they will all accumulate a bounty for your character, with a price on your head varying with the offense. At first, guards will just approach you, giving you the option to pay off your bounty while surrendering your stolen goods. If, however, you can't afford the fee, or choose to run away, the guard will begin to engage you. There is no option to go to jail in this game, and guards are invincible to ensure proper law enforcement, so it's either pay with gold,
That's that then.
or pay with your blood. Since you cannot save and load to a point prior to your crimes, you'll want to take the guards much more seriously. There's nothing more embarrassing than having one not only slaughter you in front of a bunch of other players, but then pick the bounty and stolen goods from your corpse as well. Should you perish in ESO through any means, you'll have 3 options to go about revival. You can respawn for free at the nearest waypoint, or for the cost of 1 full soul shard, you can respawn at your position of death, with a brief invincibility period being granted, but the option to engage in combat being barred as well. If you happen to have a companion with you willing to spare a soul shard, they can also revive you on the spot, which will negate the invincibility phase. Let's say, however, that your crimes were successful, and you've yet to be apprehended by a guard. You can't exactly sell your stolen goods to any old merchant. Instead, you're going to want to visit an outlaw refuge. These little sanctuaries can be found in nearly every major city in Tamriel, and usually host 2 entrances signified by the outlaw emblem. Inside, you will find a merchant, banker, and fence who will help you handle your stolen goods. You can either sell them directly, or if you find something you'd like to keep, such as a recipe you plan to sell off, they can launder your chosen wares as well. Both sales and laundering have a daily limit, so you will want to choose wisely regarding what you sell off if you plan to commit a lot of crime that day. There is a skill that is worth investing in as well if you would like to raise those daily limits. Additionally, you can also pay your bounty off here for no additional charge, and this way you won't lose your stolen goods. I really like how these refuges were handled, because instead of just being a cut and paste type reusable interior, they are all themed after the respective cities they are based in. It makes it worthwhile to visit each one at least once, because you then get to admire all of the beauty and effort put into crafting each individual hideaway. Some days though, it's not NPCs you wish to conquer, but instead your fellow player. If that is the case, you have a few options regarding PvP. Just about anywhere in the open world, you can challenge another player to a duel to the death, making it quite apparent who the victor ends up being. If you're interested in some more large-scale experiences, you can engage in queued battlegrounds or Cyrodiil campaigns. Battlegrounds are an experience featuring 1 of 5 game modes in 3 warring teams known as the Fire Drakes, Pit Daemons, and Storm Lords. Which team you are part of is totally random, and your choice of alliance will play no part in where you end up. Modes include Deathmatch, a fight to see who can get the most kills first, Capture the Relic, a spin-off of Capture the Flag, Domination, a fight to capture and hold sites on the battlefield, Chaos Ball, a mode that rewards whichever team is holding the ball while applying severe debuffs to the holder, and Crazy King, which is very much like Domination, except the sites you are required to capture will move throughout the map over time. All of these modes are very fun, and since there are 3 active factions at once, it doesn't put as much pressure on players to have to be number 1, since second place is rewarded nicely as well at the end of a match. If Battlegrounds still haven't sated your hunger for war though, Cyrodiil might be your best bet. Composed of 7 or 30-day campaigns depending on your interest, this is essentially your entry point into some large-scale wars that you can jump in and out of at your leisure. The idea is that you join up with your character's respective faction and work together alongside your alliance to seize and hold a variety of strongholds found throughout the region. Players can use siege weapons should they choose, and have the option to try and capture the opposing faction's Elder Scroll. Doing so and returning it to your base provides major bonuses for your entire faction. Whichever alliance proves themselves most superior at the end of the campaign is crowned victor. The highest ranking player will receive the title of Emperor, giving them access to a unique skill line that applies major buffs relating to Cyrodiil warfare. This region is also really great to explore in general if you're trying to collect crafting materials, conquer delves, or retrieve sky shards, as each are spread out nicely all throughout. One major feature a lot of players don't get to discover till later on in their ESO journey is that of the champion points system. After your character reaches a level cap of 50, this means that you will now level a separate collection of skills while still retaining all of the abilities you gained prior. For the most part, these skills are all passive and only really make a difference as you begin to invest a lot of points into one ability. But, seeing as you can now go from champion level 10 to 780, dedicated players will find that it eventually becomes a worthwhile endgame experience. One thing that both astonished and excited me was learning that your champion level is a cross-character feature, meaning that if you make a new toon and level them to 50, once they convert to the champion system, they will automatically pick up where your main character left off. Even better, prior to hitting 50, you can still spend and invest all of the points your higher tier characters have already accumulated in your own individual trees. But no matter where the world takes you, be it dungeons or war, everybody likes to have a place to call home, and thankfully ESO has a wide variety of them to offer. To begin, all players can acquire themselves a free in-room at the start of their journey, but beyond that, you're going to not only have to save up some coin, but occasionally you'll have to complete some quests to even earn the right to buy a particular home. Once you've gotten all that squared away though, it's time to pick a place based on your budget. Homes range from cheap inns to lavish mansions, so it's really up to your dedication to decide on what you acquire. When you finally do purchase a home, it will mostly be unfurnished, unless you decided to buy the premium crown variation, but personally I prefer to stick with in-game gold. Inside your home, you can display things like pets, mounts, and even assistants you may have acquired in-game or in the crown store over time. Naturally, you can have friends over, and for those you really trust, they can be granted permission to move and arrange things in your home. If you live in a big enough house, you can even potentially give them their own room. Through crafting dailies that we mentioned earlier, players can eventually acquire every variety of crafting table as well, making homes a great way to form a trade hall or even a guild house. To me personally, there's just something so satisfying about having a place of my own to display the many things I've collected along my journey, such as the heads of bosses I've slain, or the banners and flags of alliances I have fought with and against. Not to mention that teleporting to your house is free, so if you happen to own a large variety of properties, then you also own a large collection of free waypoints. The first house I ended up going with was called Domus Verasticus, a medium-sized home costing 295,000 gold. A special shout out to the player Runagate, who not only donated 100,000 of their own gold to my cause, but gave me a tour of their own beautiful home full of awesome memorabilia from a variety of adventures. Take a look and see what you too can accomplish. We're finally nearing the end of this review, but there's one subject I have to cover whether we like it or not, and that is the premium crown store and crown crates. In this era of gaming, loot boxes are everywhere we turn. It seems that this weird form of digital gambling has taken the community by storm, and unfortunately, ESO is no different. But exactly how harmful are these loot crates to the actual game itself? As far as I have experienced, and from the footage here, you can see I have opened a large variety of free loot crates I earned in-game. They are relatively harmless. I'd say the most dangerous thing it offers to balance of the community are EXP scrolls that give you a time-limited boost to how much experience you earn from quests and kills, but after using them myself and leveling with my friends who had them active as well, the difference was apparent, but not drastic. I certainly wasn't hitting max level within the day or anything wild like that, and just through login rewards and leveling gifts alone, I was given a bunch of free EXP scrolls even without opening crates. Eventually, some of the scrolls became so invaluable to me that I ended up using the gem conversion system to just cash them out. Everything else that comes from crown crates are really just cosmetic features like mounts, pets, costumes, and mementos. Occasionally, you'll get a potion or poison collection, but just like the EXP scroll, I tend to recycle these consumables for gems. Some of you are likely wondering about the gem system itself, and to talk about that, I'll quickly cover the topic of collections first. Your character's collection is essentially a list of every pet, mount, home, and other variety of premium or special items accumulated across your account over time. This means that if one character gets access to something, all of your characters do. Now to reel back to the topic of the crown gem system, these gems are essentially the currency you are paid out should you decide to either recycle consumables you have acquired, or if you end up getting, say, a pet you already own, it'll automatically be converted into gems as a form of consolation prize. These gems can then later be traded in for a specific reward of your choice, which can include items normally only found in crown crates. You can see here that through the system alone, I was able to acquire this awesome lion and wolf, of which can both be accessed by any of my characters now. Other rewards include costumes that will sit over your armor, allowing you to get benefits of wearing both, polymorphs, which can transform you sometimes into entirely different beings, and mementos, something we mentioned earlier that I would describe as glorified emotes. As you explore the game, you'll find a large variety of these through quests and crates, and while not every one can be seen in public, the vast majority of them are indeed visible by your fellow players. I love them simply because they tell the tale of where your account has traveled, and give you a little visual memory when interacted with. So with all that information, and from my experience, it should be known that I don't really see the premium store as that big a harm. I haven't purchased anything directly, but I did subscribe to their ESO Plus feature because it not only provided me with automatic access to all of their DLC, but it gave me crowns to spend in the store regardless. As far as I'm concerned, if you really want to buy something off of the crown store, just get ESO Plus instead. You automatically get your value in crowns upon subscribing, but then for a whole month after, you get all the added member benefits as well. Buying the crowns by themselves really doesn't seem worth it when you can get so much more for the same value. I've heard some new players complain that this game will bombard you with premium store ads every time you play, and there is some truth to this, but I don't think it's as drastic as a few try to make it seem. When you log into your character the first time for the day, a pop-up menu will show up on screen with banner ads for all the newest premium store items and deals available. But this menu plays two roles: to advertise the crown store and to remind you of your free login rewards. The bottom half of this menu is a link to the daily rewards menu, of which can be accessed for free potential premium items each day. I've gotten 2 pets and tons of crown crates all free just for logging in once a day in the last 2 months alone, and that's not including what loot came out of the actual boxes. I bought this game for $10 and spent another $15 on ESO Plus to try it out, and thus for only $25 I managed to get over 1,000 hours into this game since my original purchase. God, what the f am I doing with my life? But in all seriousness, I would say my value was very well received. There's 2 more topics I would like to cover today, the first being the outfit station. With all that talk about collections and costumes, I almost forgot about this awesome little feature. As you're traveling Tamriel, you are bound to find plenty of motif and outfit recipes. Only the character who reads it will be able to craft gear of that variety, but the actual style itself is saved to your character's collection. Now, when you visit the outfit station, you can mix and match pieces of light, medium, and heavy armor, as well as dyes to create your own personal costume that can be worn over your normal gear. I absolutely love this feature, as it keeps me actively hunting for new styles to apply to my characters, and with so many areas packed with lore to explore, the varieties of outfit you can create are vast and numerous. Certainly pay one of these stations a visit should you want to add a splash of individuality to your characters. The last major feature I'd like to cover today are PC mods. I understand that the entire population does not game on PC, so I'd figured I'd save it for last. Feel free to skip ahead a minute or two if you'd like to get to the scoring. If you happen to be a PC player such as myself, I highly recommend investing time into applying mods to your game, even if just a few. There are so many out there, and nearly one for every need you might have. Some add things that could be in the game, and others add things that should be in the game. For example, a player like myself who invests a lot of time into guild trading is going to have a lot of mail coming in from my sales. Thanks to the Mail Looter add-on, it'll automatically loot and delete my trade mail for me, and when it's done, give me a summary of everything collected with a single touch of a button. Normally, I'd have to go through each letter individually and loot them. For players who might want hints or help throughout the game, you can get an add-on to mark things like sky shards or lore books for you throughout the world. And if you think you'll be an active gatherer, you can acquire the Harvest Map add-on to mark locations where you have looted materials prior. Consider this just a tip and not a necessity when it comes to your gaming experience. I'm sure there are features here and there that I didn't talk about, but in regards to what caught my attention when actually sitting down to write this review, I've mentioned it all. Before I issue my final thoughts and score, I'd like to quickly run over the positive and negative bullet points that brought me to my conclusion. We'll start with the bad so we can end on the good. With such a poorly received launch within its first year, I think ESO still has a gloomy reputation hanging over it that can only be quelled by playing the game yourself. A lot of the newer content added into the game lately is mostly in the form of DLC, which can understandably cause potential players to turn away the experience. Leveling your riding skill while easy is very time consuming in the sense that you can only gain 1 point every 20 hours. This means in order to max out any of the 3 categories available, you'd require 2 months of dedication for one skill, and 6 months if you have hopes of maxing them all. There's practically no aquatic content. In fact, NPCs are so underprepared to handle the element that not even water-based creatures will follow you into it. At best, you'll sometimes be attacked by slaughterfish when you swim further than the devs have intended for you to be. I'd love to see an update that allows us to engage with both the beauty and horrors of the deep. There are some occasional game glitches that can range from hilarious to annoying. Funny bug, flying guards. Annoying bug, vanishing textures. Funny bug, invisible singing bards. Annoying bug, getting stuck between some barrels with no way out cause I am technically falling in place. You all get the idea. Maybe it's my system, but occasionally there can be some pop-in for both textures and models alike. This can briefly break immersion, but usually clears up rather immediately. Both enemies and buildings can occasionally be seen getting reused. This is also the case with some delves. It is not painfully consistent, thankfully, but if you play the game long enough, it's a detail you'll certainly pick up on. The physics engine in this game can occasionally cause some wonky looking death animations for NPCs, like clipping through furniture. The environments themselves are gorgeous and all exude a significant style of culture related to each respective race they represent. It's such a joy to be able to go between such vastly different themes in a singular Elder Scrolls game. The voice acting in this game, while not perfect in all aspects, is very much appreciated with keeping to the style of prior games. It's impressive that with something as large as an MMO, that they would still stay true to their audible roots. Cooperative gameplay feels very enjoyable and worthwhile compared to what it used to be. I often found myself having a lot of fun grouping up with my friends and heading into delves or public dungeons, gathering loot and gaining experience with one another despite being at significantly different levels thanks to the one Tamriel update. Being able to see the origin of each piece of equipment you have and just knowing what a vast collection exists in the game world made me all the more excited to try on each different style, even if just for fashion alone. And thanks to the costume maker, it's easy to mix and match your favorite pieces to get your own personal look. There is no shortage of quests in this game, and you can walk in practically any direction and always find someone looking for help, or some way to get yourself involved in another adventure. While every community has their bad apples, my ESO experience has yielded mostly positive people who are just looking to have as good a time as you are. Whether it's help you're seeking or just someone to be social with, players can be found in nearly every zone, so don't hesitate to speak up. One thing I always love in an MMO is player housing, and this game is no different. I just adore the idea of creating my own custom area to share with my friends, be it to show off my latest boss kill or just to hang out and level crafting together. ESO has done a great job so far with what is available, and I hope in the future they continue to expand on the idea of shared homes or even official guild houses. The music in this game is a joy to listen to. Whether you're strolling through the world or locked in the heat of combat, the soundtrack never fails to back your experience. I love being able to mix and match skills and playstyles in this game. If you want to be a spellcaster who has dual daggers as their backup weapon, you can do that. There are very few limitations on what your character can do, since you always have access to both magicka and stamina, whereas many other MMOs usually stick to just giving you a singular energy source. A small but appreciable detail is the day and night cycle paired along with weather. Depending on where you are, the mood can really change based on how these two factors decide to clash. The guild markets are a really awesome feature since they allow for a variety of in-game economies to exist. Rather than having to worry that one certain material is always going to be sold for a set price, you can instead visit a different market and see who might be selling for a better offer. Morrowind came paired with my copy, and I believe all future copies, so naturally I had to give the game extra credit for helping to kindle the flame that is my nostalgia. Last, but certainly not least, are achievements. I know not everyone cares about them, but in this game especially, if you look to achievements, you can always find something new to do, and considering that some of them actually reward more than just points, they're worth checking out. And thus, that sums up my thoughts on The Elder Scrolls Online. When I picked this game up for $10, I had mixed expectations, but now that I've actually played the game, I'm really glad I gave it a chance. It has undeniably evolved in many proper ways since its release, and as an Elder Scrolls experience, it feels like a true and proper spin-off in the series now. With all that said, I'm happy to issue this game a solid 8 out of 10. While it could have possibly earned higher, things like small bugs and glitches, as well as DLC content being split off from the main community, forced me to knock the game down a little. That being said, for the current non-sale price of $20, I'm confident in suggesting that if you enjoyed some of the gameplay aspects I shared with you in the review today, then your money won't be ill spent, even if you only get 20 or 30 hours out of the experience. The Elder Scrolls Online is a game that had an undeniably rocky start, but I have to give credit where it is due, and that is in all the effort ZeniMax has since put into the game to make it accessible to a larger variety of players. One way or another, I very much felt that I got my value's worth on this purchase. When you can squeeze that much game time out of so little a sum of money, it's hard to complain.
With all that said, I'd like to thank you guys very much for watching my review on The Elder Scrolls Online. Compared to the reviews I have planned for the future, this game was definitely on the longer side of things, but as I mentioned, this game also has history, and it's an MMO, so they tend to host wider varieties of content. If you guys enjoyed this video, feel free to leave me a like down below, as the support not only helps the channel, but it lets me know that this review format is working. If you have any feedback on this video, whether it be things I said about the game or how I did the review itself, feel free to let me know down below in the form of a comment, as I do my best to respond to all comments. And finally, if you think you'd like to see more content like this in the future, you're welcome to subscribe, and feel free to turn on notifications if you feel obliged. Both very much help the channel and are very much appreciated. So once again, thank you guys very much.
Well, it would seem my sensors have detected a score below the 10 out of 10 threshold. What have you to say for yourself?
Whoa, Todd, relax. It's just my opinion.
How's this for an opinion?
Oh, fuck.
Hey everyone, thanks again for watching this far. I really hope you enjoyed the video. It's been about 3 months in the making, but an undeniable pleasure to craft. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications if you'd like to, and should you be interested in following me in any variety of these social media platforms here, feel free. I've got a Discord open to the public, and I've been doing my best to update Twitter lately regarding video progress and channel plans. Thanks for your time everybody, and as always, stay safe, stay happy. Peace.